Joe, thanks for doing this with me today. I really appreciate it. Just by way of some introduction, Joe Nemmers and I have known each other probably longer than we care to admit, but
Right.
We first worked together with the Diocese of Phoenix on a high school project that turned into a diocesan campaign. Joe also has had experience in working with nonprofits and charities in the Archdiocese of Chicago and other places. I thought, Joe, you'd be a perfect individual to participate in what we're calling executive chats. As I spoke to you, this kind of came out of COVID-19 and having conversations with leaders of various nonprofits and trying to gauge how they're doing and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we try to get our clients to do and the other nonprofits that we speak to is a process of kind of taking a person's temperature when you talk to them. So with that as a background, why don't you, if you don't mind, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you're doing personally? How are things going in Scottsdale?
Well, it's kind of funny because I've been retired now for almost 13 years, and my routine hasn't changed terribly much since the thing started. You know, I maybe go out once a day, maybe twice, no more than that. So aside from some more planned trips to the grocery store, it hasn't really affected me very much. Now my wife is here, and our two youngest kids are here with us right now. One's working from home, the other just finished high school. So it's been a little different because of all those things, but I'd say by and large, we're fine. Our routine hasn't changed a whole lot. It's interesting just sort of being locked in. It hasn't been too bad. Kathy's been cutting my hair. I colored her hair. I grew a beard for a while, George, but I shaved it, you know. So it's been all right.
So how about, you know, I know you've been retired a bit, but you've always had such a robust life that, from my perspective, in the area of working with charities, working with philanthropies that you were passionate about. How has that adjusted in the last 3 months? What's different about that?
You mean how I work with them, or what do I observe them doing?
Well, first talk about how you've been working with them.
Well, there are several that I'm close to. My late wife and I helped found a Cristo Rey school on the west side of Chicago. Cristo Rey is the model where the kids work 1 day a week to help pay for their tuition.
Right.
It's in the Austin neighborhood on the west side, which, if you're familiar with Chicago, is a very tough place.
Yep.
So I stay in touch with them. I got off the board last year as the chairman for Carmel Catholic High School north of the city, where I went to school. My kids went to school. And so I stay in touch with them, and I do a lot of work with the Franciscan Friars of the Holy Spirit here in Phoenix, who serve the native people on the reservation south of Phoenix. So those are the three that I've, principally stayed in touch with. It hasn't really affected me too much because I'm here, and most of those places are someplace else, and I routinely talk to them anyway. But it's been interesting watching what's happened to them. The two high schools, for example, went into lockdown right away in Illinois. They both do distance learning. They don't do Zoom telecast, but they give assignments to the kids. The Cristo Rey schools had an interesting time because, their entire business model is built on the kids working with a corporate work-study partner. Now, the corporate work-study partners sent their own employees home, much less the kids. So this last quarter of the year has been pretty difficult because most of the revenue went away. Yeah. And we're worried about what's going to happen in the fall because Illinois and Chicago are still under some pretty restrictive guidelines as far as will the kids be able to work. So we've had to really scramble and do some sort of last-minute fundraising to get through the last quarter of the year. And I anticipate we'll probably do a little bit more of that before the school year starts, particularly if all the jobs don't come back up. Both of the schools did apply for the payroll protection program and did get funding through their local bank. Well, we went through Wintrust, which is a regional bank in Chicago, which did a great job. And same with the Friars, that their life hasn't been impacted too much. They're still out among the native people and doing the things they have to do. So it's been interesting watching, the different organizations sort of react like everybody else and try to find the best way to deal with this.
It's not knowing a lot about your professional life, but I do know that you had a senior role, from what I understand it, with Abbott Labs. As you kind of think back to what you did then and what they're doing now, any observations about what companies like Abbott are trying to do in terms of finding a vaccine?
Well, my first reaction is I'm really glad I'm not working right now, because I'd be in the thick of all the stuff that has to go on, because it's not just, creating products to deal with the pandemic. It's what do you do with a workforce of 100,000 people, many of whom work from an office. So they're dealing with all that too. When I retired, I was executive vice president for diagnostics for Abbott, which has become President Trump's favorite go-to in the last couple of weeks. You've seen our products in the Rose Garden on numbers of occasions, the rapid tests as well as the bigger ones. Yeah. And Abbott now has 5 different tests out, both for antibodies and for antigen. Anyway, and I'm also on the board of a DNA therapeutics, over-the-counter therapeutic company in Cincinnati. And watching the impact on a small business has been really fascinating. From an Abbott point of view, there have been frontline and center in creating diagnostic products, rapid diagnostics to diagnose COVID, as well as the presence of antibodies. So they've been in the news. You've been able to see quite a bit about it. That continues. Abbott is not a pharma company anymore, so there's no work undergoing on a vaccine. Abbott's spinoff company, which is where the pharma part of the business is, AbbVie, which is now an enormous company on its own. They just closed on their deal with Allergan the other day. There are a number of products that have been out there for a while, including a protease inhibitor that has been used for AIDS for 20 years that is in clinical trials against COVID. So it's all hands on deck for pharma and medical device companies, I can tell you that. In terms of providing product, my oldest son is a sales rep for Medtronic. He sells stuff that's used in the operating room. He's been locked out for 8 weeks. Now they continue to do stuff on the side, and he's just now getting to a point where the hospitals are going to open back up for elective surgery and other things. So that's been kind of the case, really, I think, for everybody. So my observations have been on the pharma medical device front, everybody and his sister is trying to do something, and they're getting a lot of help from the White House task force, particularly the bigger companies. For the smaller company, the DNA company I'm on the board of, we have about 200 people. We either furloughed or let go probably 70 of those people. We're in the process of hiring a number of them back because we're starting to see a little bit of recovery. But I think it's just a challenge. And I think there is this whole workforce thing. I know my old company, my daughter-in-law works for Abbott. She's still at home, and they're still kind of working through how they're going to get people back to work and how many are ever going to come back to work and how it's going to look. And I think every company is struggling with the same thing.
Yeah. So this is not as much of a question as it is just asking you to talk to me about leadership. And I've observed your leadership style. I think that you have been able to adjust what I saw as your leadership style with different situations, with different people. There's this belief, and I think it's a fact, that when you think about great leaders in history, great leaders today, they're going to be, the way they're viewed is going to have a lot to do with the challenges before them. So that is a preamble. Talk to me about if you have your thoughts, your philosophy on leadership during times like this. What should, and it doesn't have to, I'm not talking about national leaders. I'm talking about, leaders of nonprofits, leaders of boards. What kind of adjustment either have you made or would you make relative to the situation we're in?
Well, I've studied leadership my whole career. It's always been something that kind of fascinated me. And one of the things I learned as an executive, and I was taught this by my boss, was probably the best skill I could acquire is to be anticipative of things, just to anticipate what's going to happen. We are all really good reactors when it comes to things. We're seeing our whole country react to something that we probably should have better anticipated. But I think the great skill of good modern leaders is to be able to anticipate things and how it's going to look. And we can clearly do that today. I mean, you can look out and see all kinds of things about how you think things are going to happen. I think the other part, especially when we face something like this, is that leaders have a responsibility to be calm and not be histrionic and add to the confusion and the problem. They have to be the ones that everybody looks to, because in something like this, I mean, you can just see it yourself. You tune in to see what the task force is doing. You want to see what these highly accomplished physicians are saying about something you have no idea about. And when confusion happens, or when there's things that aren't quite clear, it's tough. And I think if you're a leader of a company, you need to be very consistent, very clear, provide good direction, and you have to stay calm. I think you have to balance optimism with reality. You know, you can't say everything's going to be great tomorrow when you don't really know. But coming back to the question of anticipation, I think, you know, now is fertile ground for trying to figure out how things are going to look, and put together different scenarios to anticipate, rather than just waiting for it to happen and then reacting to it. You know, the skill sets of a lot of American companies tend to be, we do our best work when the bad guys are over the wall. And, you know, I think the reality is we got to do the work before they get over the wall, so we don't have that problem.
Have you learned anything either about yourself or about others around you, about how you or they have adjusted to this? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think as I've I don't know, 500 or 600 friends on Facebook. So it's my one tool for sort of gauging nationally, and even I have a lot of friends internationally, how people do things. And I think the things I've observed by watching people say and do things and post things on Facebook is there's a great, and I'll talk about our country. I think there's a great resilience in this country. I think there's been, for a period of time, a significant amount of patience on people's behalf to behave and follow the things we were asked to do, to lock ourselves in and do so forth. I think that patience is coming to an end, but I think for a period of time, people have been willing to listen and cooperate and behave with each other. I've seen a great, Kathy and I laugh every day. I say all the time, the funniest people in America are not in Hollywood, they're on Facebook, and they're normal people who come up with the crazy things. And pandemic, you know, all kinds of applications for face masks, and just, it's been hilarious to watch normal people who aren't running around like crazy, who can sit down and think, react to something like this. And I've been impressed by the great sense of humor of the American people, as well as the resilience. I think you're starting to see a shift, though, of people saying, you know, okay, enough is enough. We can't bankrupt our country, and we can't step on our constitutional liberties just to make sure we're going to stop a virus. There has to be a better balance. And that's why you're seeing people just disobeying orders and taking off and doing things, is because I think they haven't been given enough explanation of what's going to happen. And they're like, all right, well, let's go back to business. So, but my prior observations have been, I think there's been a great sense of humor, a great resilience, and a lot of teamwork to try to get it done. But the longer it goes on and there's less explanation, it's tougher for people to accept that.
Talk to me about the, if you don't mind, about the Catholic Church. How do you think the Catholic Church has done in terms of their ability to reach out to their members and to those that support them and ask for help?
It's an interesting story. So on Sunday mornings, I can sit on the couch and watch Mass, either with Bishop here in Phoenix, or I can watch it in my hometown in Libertyville, Illinois, or my wife's town in Storm Lake, Iowa, where I've done a lot of philanthropy work, or I can watch the friars down on the reservation. And I think it's been interesting to watch, and a lot of these places I'm talking about are small parishes in the middle of nowhere, and they've managed to figure out how to do live stream and put stuff on Facebook. And at the same time be able to provide on their website all the readings and the music for the Mass that day. So they've done a marvelous job, I think, of figuring out how to use technology to get to people. It is interesting, every Mass I watch, it doesn't matter where it is, you know, they make the obligatory plea for funding, because, you know, they're getting cut off. And one of the things that's really interesting is the churches, the parishes that have very high compliance rates on electronic giving aren't the ones doing that. It's the ones who haven't established electronic giving as part of normal giving, where they get stuff from the pews every Sunday that are having a hard time, I think. One of the things I'm curious about is what's going to happen when we can't all go back to church and do stuff. Are they going to stop doing live streaming of masses? Because it's sort of like if you keep doing that, people are probably going to go, "Hey, this is too easy. I'm just going to go back and stay in bed and watch mass." So I think they've done a good job of reaching out. I can tell you, my parish back in Chicago, they called me. They were calling everybody, regardless of where you were, to check. It's happened twice. The diocese here has called me. The friars have called me. The high schools have called. I think they've all done a good job of using a model where they get out and try to stay in touch with people physically, in addition to just doing a live streaming mass, for example.
Give me a composite, if you will, of the kind of conversations that you've been getting from them, because that's also something we've been trying to kind of.
Well, it's just a brief phone call. It's just a brief phone call that says, "Hey, we're reaching out to everybody in the parish. Want to know how you're doing? Do you need anything?" It could be anything. And like the parish I come from outside Chicago is a very big parish. It's in a nice area. They have a lot of organizations and capacities to do things. So I'm sure if they called somebody and said, we can't get out for this reason, or we need medicine, or we need food, they'd probably help them. But the conversations are all around how you doing. How's your head? Do you need anything from us? We're thinking about you. It's a nice surprise when they call. It's always good to have somebody call and check. It's like when I call and check on you, my wellness checks.
So Joe, one of the things that nonprofits are faced with, and you're a perfect person to talk about this, because you've been very generous to a number of different causes that mean a lot to you. If one of those causes that mean a lot to you were to approach you at this point and ask you to do something special to confront a particular need that's really been precipitated by the pandemic, what would be the best way for them to approach that with you?
Well, they have. One of them has. It's the Cristo Rey Cool School in Chicago. And we put together a group of sort of the historical top donors in the school. And at a calling, we put together a list of the top historical donors for that school. And we called them. We put a calling tree together, and called and asked for funds to get us through the fourth quarter. And we did. And that's what happened. And I helped the president put together the script for the ask. And it was around, look, this was obviously not planned for. Here's a look at our budget. We run money pretty tight around here, but as a result of our revenue being cut off, we're in kind of a once in a, we hope, situation, and we need some help to get through the fourth quarter because we don't have any revenue coming in. And it's pretty easy to explain. So they did call, and I did help along with about 15, 16 other people to help augment stuff to get us through the quarter. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, was there any, you talked about a script, which I think can be very, very helpful. Was there any discussion in the beginning of the conversation about, about how that person is doing and whether or not they would be, in fact, open to a conversation about philanthropy?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we did. We first off, we acknowledged when we called the individuals that, you are among the top 15 or whatever it was that have given money historically to the schools. These are major givers, 6 figures and up.
Right.
And we said, look, you understand what's going on. Our model's based on work study and our kids aren't working. We're down by X amount. We have a big hole. And we're trying to put together a team to fill that hole through this quarter. We're augmenting it with the payroll protection program from the CARES Act. We're not sure what the summer looks like, but we got to get the kids through the fourth quarter. And that essentially was the story. It was very simple. We just laid the mechanics out, showed the deficit, said, this is how much we're looking for. Can you do anything? And everybody did.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. People are basically good. And people, I think, have certain charities that mean a lot to them. And then there's been kind of a long-standing relationship that you have to build on and count on those people.
Well, let me just finish with one thing on that.
Yeah,
I talked to the development director, or VP at a school, college in Minnesota, and I asked her how things are going. And the way she portrayed it was, they didn't ask anybody for anything for a period of time. Everybody was all in the same boat. And she said for some of the major gift asks that they had going on, when this started, they sort of suspended them. And because most people wanted to retreat and look at what was happening to their portfolio when everything went completely crazy. But there's been a recovery of that to a degree, right? And it's sort of stabilized. Today is a good example. And it's come back up a fair amount since that time. And she said there's been a renewed willingness. In fact, people have even called and said, let's continue the conversation because, we're back in a position where we feel better about it. And I think there's some of that going on all over the place.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. This has been very, very gracious of you to spend time with me. I know how difficult that can be.
Yeah, just time, not the time, just with you.
Exactly. Any parting words for people who might be seeing this and looking for some either leadership or inspiration? Anything that you've learned that you want to?
Well, I think, it's a great time to be introspective. I wouldn't use every day to be introspective. You'll go crazy after a point in time. But I think it's a time to stop and examine everything you're doing. I mean, on the sort of fun front, my list of house projects that I planned for the rest of the year are now complete because I've had a chance to do everything. But it's a good chance to be contemplative. It's been a lot of fun to the extent that I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of friends, and I've called a lot of friends. I mean, we don't ordinarily do that. You and I have done it, but a lot of people don't do that. But there's a lot of that going on right now. People just wanting to make sure people are okay, which I think is terrific.
Wow. Thanks, Joe. Give my best to Kathy.
I will.
And you stay well, and we'll be talking soon. Thank you.
Thanks, George.